Welcome back to Danielle O'Terry's Italy. Guidebooks have several lives, and despite the internet, they have been diminished, but they're not dead yet. And that's because they are among the only truly fact-checked pieces of travel material available. When you are paying for a guidebook, you are paying for fact-checked knowledge, and the transaction is clear. Now, when you purchase a guidebook, at first, it might just be a dream. It's a catalog of possibilities. Then it becomes a strategic tool, then a travel companion when it's in your bag and you're actually on the trip. And then when it returns home, you either give it away right away, or it becomes a beloved souvenir that sits on your shelf, or it just sits on your shelf. Often people will hold on to them because, it feels like an act of violence to throw away a book. I get it. But, eventually when you have to move or really clean and make space, Lonely Planet Prague is going in the trash. But guidebooks do have another life if you hold on to them long enough. They become a time capsule. They are an eyewitness account that was, again, aggressively fact-checked about a world that no longer exists. And that is what you can use to reflect on that world and see just how much has changed. And that impulse is what is suddenly causing an essay that I wrote back in August of 2022 to now go viral. It's called The Before Sunrise Generation, and I wrote it in response to Gen X clients of mine who are returning to travel now that their kids were leaving home and they had time and money to travel once again. And they were asking questions like, should I buy a Eurail pass or stay in a pension? And I found myself explaining how the way they had traveled, that I also traveled in the 90s, really no longer exists. Then this current wave of 90s nostalgia, inspired by Love Story about JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette, has the kids of Gen X marveling at how free the 90s seemed. 100% of social interactions happened in real life with total presence. Nobody on their phone because the smartphones didn't exist yet, and just figuring it out. So think about Jesse and Celine, the protagonists of the 1995 film Before Sunrise. They start talking while riding the train and decide to get off together in Vienna and spend the night wandering the city and talking. Nobody was location tracking them. Not a single photo was taken. Two strangers on a train, just figuring it out. Now, maybe Jesse and Celine would meet in line for a much delayed Ryanair flight and maybe start talking only if they had been there so long that their phone batteries died. That thing that to me today seems so old school and authentic was, at another point in time, the vulgar new thing. Prior to rail travel, making the grand tour of Italy, which gives us the word tourism, required coach travel, personal invitations, and letters of introduction. So you had to be a person of means and education. Train travel made it available to anyone. And then a new industry emerged to meet this new traveler, the travel guide. Baedeker guides were first published in Germany, and they were famous for their red cloth covers. They were comprehensive guides to cities and rural places, and so they removed the need for a letter of introduction forever. They liberated people from relying solely on local guides who were only available to elite networks. The term Baedekering could be used with the same snark I sometimes reserve for TikTok tourism. In E.M. Forster's A Room with a View, Baedeker is a code word for this kind of pedantic sightseeing that Forster is portraying as typical of the English in Italy. It's funny because it's portrayed as kind of low class, but the Baedekers were very dense with information on art and history, and they were written by specialists as well. They were especially praised for their German precision, which is exactly the thing that made them fall out of favor after World War II, when German precision was no longer a virtue. Early in the story, Lucy is shown studying Baedeker's Handbook to Northern Italy and committing to memory the most important dates of Florentine history. And then she meets an eccentric lady novelist who disapproves of this and tells her, no, you are not to look at your Baedeker. We will simply drift. I love that line. We will simply drift. The author Henry James also was not a fan of democratized travel. In 1909, he wrote his book Italian Hours, where he decried that Venice was overrun by tourists, totally devoid of authenticity, that the sentimental tourist's sole quarrel with his Venice is that he had too many competitors there. He liked to be alone, to be original, to have, at least to himself, the air of making discoveries. So just as I can be very eye-rolly about TikTok and Instagram, I know that those who had experienced the Grand Tour were disgusted by the over-tourism that proliferated in the 1890s. I have been saying this for a while, and now I think I might be wrong, that those of us who were born pre-Y2K have witnessed this accelerated period of time when technology has changed things more quickly than anything else in human history. But history, the great love of my life, has pushed back on this. Recently, Ada Palmer, the author of the fantastic book, Inventing the Renaissance, Myths of a Golden Age, articulated this in an interview, and I will link to this in the show notes. That's at danielleoteri.com. She said that people in the 1310s were nostalgic for the way it was in the 1300s. And there has always been upending innovation, even if we look back and today we don't find that innovation particularly interesting. But, chairs with backs, different kinds of metallurgy. People are always innovating. But I fully confronted my self-important idea when I opened an old guidebook called Naples in the 90s, though it is talking about the 1890s. The first chapter is called Vanishing Naples. The author, Eustace Neville Rolfe, I'm just going to call him Eustace, British consul to South Italy, speaks about Naples as a place to see the last of the old world, superstitions fading, religious practices disappearing, a pre-industrial way of life giving way. Now, our buddy Eustace is very British. He praises the local people for being charming and vivid and picturesque, but he also finds their poverty grotesque. And he believed in that particular way of the British Empire that modernity and order must come, that it is in fact a mercy, and that the undercurrent, when he says it all must go, isn't just an observation, it's a verdict. So Naples had been the capital of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, a monarchy, and that ended with the Italian unification into the modern nation we know today in 1861. Now, that was to be a good thing economically for everyone, but of course, nobody had any idea how much more change was barreling toward them. The 1890s was the heart of the Second Industrial Revolution, or the second phase of it, which came later to Italy because the Italian peninsula always had a robust agricultural economy, really since the Roman Empire. They didn't need to industrialize until they were absolutely forced to. In some ways, this reminds me of when people from India say, we went straight from 3G to 5G. The monarchies of pre-modern Italy fell when Italy unified, and wealth consolidated in the north, with an industrial corridor developing between Milan, Turin, and Genoa. Add in harsh taxation, and southern Italy went into economic freefall. And the result was mass emigration. So to my fellow Southern Italians of the diaspora, this is why we are where we are right now, and not where our ancestors had been for centuries before. The damage to the South had begun long before unification, and it began with wool. The wool and the olive oil trade, which went together because olive oil was used for processing wool, had fueled the Renaissance, and it sustained the economy of southern Italy for centuries. The Medici and the great banking houses of Florence built their wealth on wool. The whole system ran on the twice-yearly migration of massive sheep herds along ancient grass paths called tratturi from the highlands of Abruzzo down through Molise to the plains of Puglia. Shepherds had been following these routes since the 3rd century BC, and the families who owned the flocks built the great palaces that you still find often abandoned in the mountain towns of the Abruzzo. Then, the first phase of the Industrial Revolution at the turn of the 18th century gutted the wool market. British industrialization mechanized textile production, collapsed the price of cloth, and eliminated the economic reason to maintain these enormous herds. The customs authority that had regulated the entire sheep economy was abolished, and by the late 19th century, when the railroad arrived, the job was done. The mountain population left, seeking places in the city and abroad, without the support of this age-old, stable economic system. Many, after the yearly migration, were simply obliged to leave forever. And here is the thing about places that have one economic system. They collapse rather than transform. Naples, the big city, chaotic and changeable, was kind of wobbling through it when Eustace is giving us his account. He spends a lot of time in the book discussing the wearing of amulets and the belief in spirits and spells that is disappearing among Neapolitans. He even catalogs these amulets. He has pictures of them. He's searching jewelry stores for them. He has a mermaid and a seahorse in particular, and these were objects that were thought to keep away the bad air, the malaria that brought cholera and malaria. The 1870s and 1880s had seen just terrible cholera outbreaks across Italy that was spread by standing water. An easy fix that did not begin to resolve until the 1890s. Better sanitation, diminished superstition. And in this moment, Eustace is documenting it without exactly knowing why it's disappearing. The mermaid is still a symbol of Naples, but you won't see it anymore as an amulet meant to ward off the bad air. You will see the cornicello, a little horn. It's everywhere in Naples, and usually it's red. You find it on keychains, dashboards, restaurant walls. But now it is transformed from a tool to a symbol of identity. And what's interesting is that even though so much has changed, the descriptions of Naples in the 1890s remain, which is a really fascinating commentary on how the spirit of a place can persist. Henry James in Italian Hours described the waterfront of Naples, the lungomare, it's lazzaroni, who are the peasants fishing on the waterfront, and the general air of beauty and chaos. It's still like that. It's pedestrianized, it's lined with hotels and restaurants. It's not as chaotic as other parts of Naples, but it is full of life in that distinctly Neapolitan way. And you will still see locals with their fishing poles in the water right next to the port where the giant Carnival cruise ships are docked and where millions of Italians once departed for lives abroad. It's completely different and completely the same. Returning to the book, Naples in the 90s, it emphasizes much of the advice that I still pass on today. He says, go to Ischia, visit the ruins at Baia, go see the stadium at Capua, which is like seeing the Colosseum, except that you will be the only one there, other than maybe an older Belgian couple that's visiting, because every archaeological site in Italy has one Belgian couple visiting. I don't know who writes their guidebooks, but they must be good people. He says, yes, Capri is full of beauty, but, hardly any Caprese people live there anymore because the expats have moved in. Yes, that's what he said in 1897. He discusses Torre del Greco and how the coral supplies have been diminished and the fishermen have to go all the way to Sicily now where they find this more inferior coral that's kind of yellow. But in Torre del Greco, they are still making and selling cameos. And you know what? 130 years later, they are still selling cameos there because the craft has survived. And in Torre Annunziata, he recommends this as a place to try macaroni. That's where all the factories were and still are, Gragnano pasta in particular. He writes, the principal industry of the town is macaroni making, which may be seen here in great perfection on application at any of the mills. Until recently, it was supposed that macaroni, like wine, could only be made by manual labor. The skill of modern engineers has shown this notion to be fallacious, and macaroni is now almost universally made by machinery, and it is not at all inferior to that made by the old-fashioned plant. We have, of course, a loss of the picturesque, but we are learning to bear this loss with the serenity acquired by habit. The loss of the picturesque. Oof, that makes me feel caught. Because how many times have I tried to frame a photo to block out the electrical wires or look for a Vespa or an old Fiat to anchor my shot instead of the more ubiquitous Toyota Yaris? In many ways, tourism is the biggest thing protecting the picturesque. Because nobody wants to go on a food tour to the Conad. They want to go to the Campo di Fiori market. And so these details of the old world perhaps persist for the sake of tourism, but they do preserve something important for the people that live there. Here's a detail that I love. Eustace notices the public writers at their tables in the streets, fewer of them now, their business decidedly slacker than it was in the old days. These people were scrivani. They served the illiterate. They would set up a table on the street, as he describes, and they would fill out documents, help you with bureaucratic things, write letters to relatives abroad, and also frequently write love letters. And the thing that was putting them out of business? The post office. And it's worth pausing on that because the post office wasn't just about delivering mail. It was a new institution in a country that was really only about 30 years old at the time. And the post office was the place where bureaucratic life was being centralized. Document filings, official correspondence, translations, all of it was being standardized and routed through state infrastructure for the first time. And so the public writer, who had been the human interface between the illiterate citizen and the written world, was being replaced by an institution. When I was traveling in 2001, 2002, I used internet cafes the same way. Once every few days, I'd buy an hour, log into my Yahoo or AOL account, and check emails that were still being written like letters. The smartphone erased the need to go to an internet cafe, and they disappeared as quickly as they sprang up. But now AI empowers anyone to be completely uninhibited in their written expression in any language. And speaking of AI, Eustace also writes about Herculaneum, which was very close to Pompeii, also buried in 79 AD. He describes the discovery of the Villa of the Papyrus, and he says that when it was first discovered, people called it the House of the Coal Merchant because of all the pieces of carbon found there. But later, they discovered these pieces of carbon were charred scrolls of papyrus, an entire Roman library carbonized by the eruption. He writes, and I love this, "There is no saying what literary treasures this library may contain. Hitherto, nothing of the first importance has been found, the works being chiefly philosophical, but there is every reason to hope that a wealthy man's library contained in 79 AD have works which have been lost to the world." He wrote that in 1897, and these same scrolls, still unreadable the moment you try to open them because they will crumble in your hands, are now being decoded by AI. The Vesuvius Challenge, a project that uses machine learning to read the carbonized papyrus without physically unrolling it, is uncovering that text. We may yet find out what was in that library. Eustace couldn't have imagined it, and I don't think we could even a couple of years ago. But it's happening. As someone who attended both high school and college in the 90s, the internet just seemed to happen. We had Prodigy, AOL, Instant Messenger, but these all seemed like new toys for about 10 years until everything rapidly digitized in the early aughts. It's funny because I feel like I saw the end of the old world in Florence in the 90s when there were still these little shops on side streets with nothing more than a pot of hot oil and an older woman there frying things. And I yearn for that so much when I see people standing in line for these viral sandwiches inspired by social media. Eustace closes his chapter on vanishing Naples to say, "If we have dwelt at some length on Naples from the old world point of view, it is because we love her best, clad in her old garments. But we need not blind ourselves to the fact that this all must go. Naples is going very rapidly indeed." I opined in my Before Sunrise essay that the internet democratized meticulous planning, but it annihilated spontaneity. But the lesson from Eustace? We are learning to bear this loss with the serenity acquired by habit, because we are always witnessing the end of something and the beginning of something. If you have enjoyed this, please leave a review, put a star next to it, or subscribe at danielleoteri.com. I truly appreciate all of the interactions that I receive. This could be lonely work, and so when I receive comments or subscriptions, it really does mean so much to me. Thank you so much for listening. Have